Well, Lennie, thank you very much for making time to do an interview for us for the Scottish Jazz Archive. And I wondered if I might start by asking, how you first got into jazz and why you ended up with the instrument that you ended up with.
Okay, let me start from the very beginning. When I was 10 years old, my father, I was the youngest of three of a family, and my father sent us all to piano lessons. And I rebelled after 3 months of piano lessons. I said, I am not going to go back. I don't want to play the piano. And my father said, well, you're going to play something. What would you like to play? And I had just been the week before, I had been to the movies, and it was a movie featuring Harry James. So I said, I want to play a trumpet. So my father appeared the next week with a trumpet in the case and said, here's your trumpet, and the teacher is arriving on Monday. So that was me at the age of 10, starting to play. Um, it was all very regimented. I had great difficulty maintaining a teacher. These were in the days of national service and things, and guys disappeared. Uh, but eventually, I got hold of a teacher, and at the grand old age of 17, I think it would be, I was still in school, and it so happened that the former Pupils Club in Camp Hill School in Paisley were starting a jazz band, and they were looking for a trumpet player. So there I was, and I started. I think I played my first jazz gig when I would be 18. I think 18 thereabouts, and that was called the High Society Jazz Band, and I was surrounded by teachers from the school. There were no other pupils about it, so there were lots of guys older than me. And eventually I got a job. Now, the Penman Band, I think I depped with the Penman Band at the age of 19, I would be. It was 1959. Alistair MacDonald and myself both joined the George Penman Band in 1959. And on and off, I played with George Penman through until 77, I think, 1977. I went off to work in France for a few years, and I left the band at that time. But I subsequently rejoined it when I came back. I came back from Paris. And the places that we played in the St Andrews Halls on a Saturday night, in the ballroom in St Andrews Halls. And of course, that in October '62, that was the Great Fire of St Andrews Halls, and we lost that gig and moved to Clyde Football Club's Shawfield Stadium. And we played there every Saturday for years and years. These were in the days in Glasgow. You could go and listen to a jazz band any night in the week. Every night there were bands playing. There were lots of bands, it must have been more than a dozen active traditional jazz bands. And at that time, I had started my accountancy apprenticeship, which should have taken me 5 years to qualify. But playing 6 and 7 nights a week in a jazz band didn't help my progress. So eventually, I think it was 7.5 years after I started, and eventually qualified as a chartered accountant. I kind of dreamt about the idea of being a professional musician, but on limited, very limited tours with the Penman Band, we'd go up north for a long weekend and play 4 or 5 gigs. And the lifestyle I didn't like at all. The idea of getting thrown out of digs at 8 in the morning after playing to midnight the night before, and then going to the cinema so that you could sleep in the afternoon. I just hated that. Absolutely hated that. So I was determined that I would continue to play, but I would do so as a semi-pro. I got lots of opportunities to play with very, very good musicians as a working semi-pro. Now, where did I go after the Penman Band? I played in Kenny Matheson's band. Kenny had a band called the Jazz Herd, Heard, and there were some terrific musicians in it, including Kenny. There was John Cairns, Florrie Cairns' brother from the Clyde Valley Stompers. He was in piano. Alistair MacDonald was in banjo. Dick Stroke, fine clarinet player, and George Kidd, very fine trombone player. These were following my maxim of always playing with people who were better than me, and thoroughly enjoyable, really was. Then what happened? I played with Dave Batchelor's band. Have you spoken to Dave?
Not yet. We haven't. No.
He's ill, actually. He's on a course of what's it called? It's a cancer treatment. He's got prostate cancer.
Oh, sorry to hear that.
Yeah, he's young. I mean, he's a lot younger than me. I'll be 80 next month. David is, I think, 63 thereabouts, and he's a fine musician. Played with Dave Batchelor's band over 30 years, I would guess. Dave's been running bands. Initially as the Bachelors of Jazz, all bachelors like our fathers before us, as Dave has always said. And then he started the Scottish Jazz All-Stars, which had Brian Kellogg on piano, John Ray on drums, Ronnie Ray on the bass, Florrie Cairns on clarinet, Dave on trombone. Who have I missed? Can't think. Fiona Duncan was the vocalist. She was the star performer. Played with them for 3 or 4 years. Then Forry, who had moved back from Zurich, he'd been living in Zurich for 30 odd years. He moved back to Edinburgh, and Mike Hart, who was the organizer of the Edinburgh Jazz, the founder of the Edinburgh Jazz Festival, he asked Forry to make up a quartet to play an interval gig at that Jazz and Jive, a jazz club. It's in at the rugby club in Edinburgh. Anyway, Forry and I and Roy Percy, was the first time I met Roy, and Mike Hart played this gig. And we just did like a 40-minute spot or something in the middle. And it was recorded by Norrie. You know who I mean, Norrie? Forgot his second name.
Norrie Thompson.
Norrie Thompson, that's him. It was recorded by him, and he left a copy of it with Florrie Cairns. And Florrie listened to it, and he phoned me back. He phoned me the next week, and he said, "Look, this quartet, this could work. Do you fancy having a go at it?" And I said, "Sure thing." So we formed this band called Quattromic Jazz, which has been going since 2007, I think we started. And it was Florrie Cairns, myself, Alice MacDonald on banjo and vocals, and Roy Percy. And we've been going very happily ever since, up until March last year, of course, when the COVID-19 tragedy hit us. And we haven't played since, but we've made four CDs, and going fairly well. We managed to more than break even in terms of CD sales. And that's really been the band I've played most with, although I tend to get a lot of depping jobs. You know, Jerry Ford, for instance, Graham Blamire, if they're stuck for a trumpet player, they'll phone me. So I get to play with lots of different musicians. I know most of the guys of my age group anyway in the jazz scene.
And I take it when you were learning the trumpet, you weren't getting jazz lessons then, were you? Or
not at all, not at all. I was playing. I used to play at school concerts when I would be 14 or 15, and I was playing a selection of Ivor Novello melodies, accompanied by the music teacher. And it was really the experience of the former People's Club at the school that took me into jazz. And at first, I mean, I was reading Harry Gold arrangements and trumpet solos that were written by, now, wait till I think about this. What was the guy's name? His Enrico Tommaso, you know him. He played with Acabil. He's a terrific trumpet player. His father played in the Harry Gold band, and he used to write out, you know, you'd buy a copy of At the Jazz Band Ball, and there'd be a solo by Enrico's father all written out, which is how it started. And not being a great reader, my reading was very far from perfect, so I ended up actually busking most of them. I guess that was my introduction to jazz and improvisation.
And was there a lot of jazz in the house growing up, or was that something you discovered?
Not at all. My brother, who was a semi-pro piano player, he played in dance bands, and but we didn't have a record player. I mean, I didn't have a record player till after I was married. In these days, it would be on like children's TV. It was very common. They would have, you know, Kenny Baker's Half Dozen would be on. There was another trumpet player called Freddie Clayton who played in a small group. This was children's entertainment, playing jazz. Very good. I mean, that was really, I guess, when I became interested in trying to perform in that kind of music. But I've never regretted it. A lot of my happiest times, lots of my friends I met through the jazz world, and I've never ever regretted playing in bands, because playing in a good band to a good audience, there is absolutely nothing in life like it. Absolutely nothing. I love it.
Can you tell me a bit about the kind of people that were coming to the concerts, you know, back in those early days?
Well, in the early days, it was colleges and university students who tended to associate with jazz bands. The alternative kind of street music was based largely on Cliff Richard and the Shadows. You know, there were all these guys with 4 guitars and all dancing about. And I hate to be introduced class into it, but generally speaking, the people who listened to our kind of music were people in the tertiary section of education. It was the university students and the like. It wasn't your average street guy in Sauchiehall. You know, it was good, and people used to, you know, laugh at me playing in a jazz band, you know, with my accounting background, and always the insinuation was that, you know, I was associated with drink and drugs. I never met anyone who took drugs until I would be in my 40s, I would guess, and only then, very, very, very few people. generally speaking, it's very clean. People are very responsible.
Yeah, that's always been the abiding sort of view of jazz, isn't it? That it's vice and drugs and and it's all underground. What were the kind of venues that you were playing in those early days?
Now, when did it start? I started playing in the town hall in Lennie. That was my first gig with the George Penman Band in 1959. George's band became, I think, the most popular band in Scotland during the very early 60s. And we used to play, there were two evening newspapers in Glasgow, the Evening Times and the Evening Citizen, and they ran jazz band contests, would you believe? And there'd be 8 bands playing in the big arena in St Andrews Halls. And I laugh when I look back at it because we were all dead young and really, really keen, and it was very competitive. But we packed that place out. There'd be 2,500 people there. It was very, very popular at that time. Be 2,500 people there, and there'd be 6 or 7 bands, and each member of the band get paid 30 shillings. So somebody was coining it in. We were young and naive. We didn't think about money these days. I mean, it's just a chance to play. Where else did we play? We played every Saturday in the St Andrews Ballroom. There were always golf clubs, tennis clubs, who regularly used jazz bands. And there were 1 or 2 commercial operations. A chap called Andy Daisley, you must have heard of Andy Daisley. He was a local promoter who promoted commercial events and various clubs.
And across the years, I mean, because that's a long career that you've had, and still are having, by all accounts.
If only I could find an audience.
Well, if only this COVID thing would hurry up and go away. But how have you seen changes over that period of time? Because I mean, things must have changed.
Changes in that it was the music for youth when I was a youth. And it's now I'm playing to people of my age group. And there are very, very few. We play the quartet of my jazz. We played every month at White Craig's Tennis Club and subsequently White Craig's Golf Club for the last couple of years. And it's a pack out, there's a waiting list. There was always a waiting list for people to come. There's a maximum of 105 people or so, and it was people were coming and buying a meal and buying drinks at the club, and we'd perform for 2 hours. And it was always very popular, but it was people, there'd be nobody under 65 latterly. It's very sad because the times when you play in mixed age events, like a wedding or something like that, the youngsters seem to enjoy the type of music, but they don't come to listen.
Yeah, I've always found that once you play to them, they love it, but they don't know it exists before the event, as it were. But,
indeed, if it's not guitars, they don't know. They don't think it's music. Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Very sad.
And tell me more about the kind of people that you played with, because you were saying that you've made a lot of great friends through playing, outside of accountancy, I suppose. So have you in a way led a double life with a social circle from accountancy and another one from the music world, or do they mix?
Accountants are not the most sociable individuals. I don't really have any. I can't think of any friends. I've got friends I worked when I qualified, I worked in the computer industry. I moved out of the profession. I didn't enjoy working in the profession very much. and I've got lots of friends from my industrial experience. Interesting, I play with a band that used to play once a month in the Irvine Harbour Arts Theatre, led by a guy, George Hewitt. I think he was educated in Edinburgh. Do you know George? Yeah. Yep. He was mixing at that time with Sandy Brown and Al Fairweather. That he's of that age group. He now lives in the West Coast. He lives in Irvine. But the band there, Graham Playmeyer used to play in it. But there are 3 chartered accountants in a 6-piece band. 3 chartered accountants, a civil engineer, a university lecturer, and a music advisor, Glasgow's music advisor, all played in the band. So it's a mix of people, but I've known them for 60 years. You know, it's part of my life.
That's what I've always found that fascinating about the jazz world, is that it is a mix of people. It's
great.
And I was going to say that it's funny also that there's so many accountants that play jazz. You know, there's Jack Finley, there's yourself, there's Ken as well. He's an accountant.
There's Ken, Ken. Ken was brought up about. He lived less than half a mile away from me when we were growing up. Ken's a bit younger than me, but we've been playing together off and on in bands for must be the best part of 60 years now. And he is another chartered accountant who was more interested in music than in accountancy.
And did you tour much in around Scotland or further afield?
My wife always laughs because everywhere we go in Scotland, I drive past places and I say, I played a gig in there. You know, and the Permanent Band used to do weekends. In fact, there was one period when we played Aberdeen on a Wednesday night. We would leave. I would sneak away early from the office. I was still doing my apprenticeship at the time. I sneak away early from the office and we'd drive up to Aberdeen and play for like 2.5 hours in Aberdeen and come back in wee hours in the morning. You know, that's why I never did very well in my accountancy exams at that time. I really struggled. There's another thing that you just made me think about. One of the tours we did up north, we ended up playing at a thing called the Elgin Jazz Festival. I can't remember who ran it, but the band at that time would be Ivan Henderson and clarinet, myself and trumpet. Trombone would be George Kidd. George, I think, at that time was playing piano. He ended up, you know, because of the state of piano, most pianos we came across, he ended up switching to bass. Farry Forsyth, the Edinburgh guy. You know him? He was in drums. And it was a 2-section event. There was a modern jazz section and there was a traditional jazz section. And then there was an overall award, and we won the overall. We won the jazz section and we won the overall award as the best overall band, we were called. I remember George Kidd lying, having consumed a good bit of alcohol on the way back, and we had invested in a light blue suits. That was the band uniform, white shirts, red ties. And I remember George sitting at the back saying, "That was terrible what they said about our suits. They said they looked like boiler suits." And we said, "What do you mean, George?" He said, "Well, we got the best overall band." And George's wife at that time, Carol Kidd, she was a singer. She got an award as well. That was great times. I mean, the talented people I have played with, really, really terrific. Carol Kidd was an outstanding talent. Forrie Cairns was an outstanding talent.
And you've played
Brian Kellogg.
You've played very much across styles, haven't you, in jazz?
Yeah, I didn't always have a banjo in it, you know, but it never really much moved beyond a kind of Humphrey Lyttelton type band as I was associated with. I remember the times when he had Bruce Turner, and he didn't have a banjo in his band. He was one of the few bands popular at that time that didn't have a banjo player. But that's as modern as I would get. And of course, playing with guys like Brian Kellogg, but you have to move on a wee bit. Talking of Brian Kellogg, I was playing golf with Brian yesterday. He's a very, very good but inactive golfer. Right, he's very talented in the golf course. Keeps beating me.
Well, that's annoying. Yeah, I hear Tommy Smith's very fond of a game of golf as well. I've heard.
I don't think he's getting much time to play. He used to come when I was on the board of the Scottish National Jazz Orchestra for 10 years, and Tommy used to come and play. He and Brian would come to my local golf club and play golf. He was very good. Like Tommy is good at everything he does. I mean, he's a genius in my view. Terrific.
Yeah, I seem to remember reading once on his website, and it's probably not there anymore, but he says that had he not been a professional saxophone player, he would have been a professional golfer.
That's right. That's right. And it could have been. I mean, Tommy was, when he decided to take up golf, what age would he be? Mid to late 20s. He bought 3 top of the range sets of golf clubs, and he got a net set up in his garden, and he hit 300 balls a day. I mean, that's fantastic. I mean, it's just the guy's the standards he sets for himself are really, really high. I mean, I think I'm a great admirer of Tommy Smith. I think he's a great guy.
Yeah, and he's
very good.
He's certainly done a lot for Scottish jazz in both playing and education.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, if you think back on this sort of, I mean, how long a career? 60-year career, almost. Yeah. What are the real standout moments for you?
Poof. Broadcasts, I suppose. You know, the Penman Band in the early days of it used to be the Scottish Home Service. We used to do a regular gig, and they would bring in, you know, stars to guest with us. Kenny Ball, for instance, would come and play with the band. George Chisholm, I think, was one as well. It's difficult to put a highlight on it, I mean, because the whole thing was enjoyable. I mean, we got paid, but you didn't do it for money. You know, you played because it was fun. And there were nights when it was a drag, but with a good audience and the band going well, I mean, it's just delightful. That would be a highlight, I think, for me.
And you were never tempted to move to London like so many did back then?
Not at all, no. As I say, I kind of flirted with the idea of being a professional musician, but decided, I think, in retrospect, quite wisely, not to do it because, I mean, I got a couple of offers, but as David Batchelor summed it up, he said you could be, instead of being reasonably successful accountant, you could have gone professional, worked for 3 years in London and be driving a taxi now. which is sadly a lot of very talented people ended up doing.